Good morning, good morning, good morning. Hope everybody is doing well today. I'm excited about being alive. Good morning and welcome. I'm just putting up a notification for my Facebook viewers that we are on today, on live. And I hope that everybody is having a great and wonderful morning. Hope that all is well. If you would, go ahead and swipe and invite your followers. That will help us. Good morning. We're also thankful for those of you who have been subscribing to our page on YouTube, which is Church Love 333. We've got about, in the last 30 days, about 70 new subscribers. So we want to take a moment to say thank you to those of you who are checking out our bio and subscribing to our page, which is where we try to archive as much as we can any of our playbacks, as well as there's other things, other playlists on the page that you can engage in. There's worship music over there, there's poetry over there, there's Bible study series over there, and there's also our archive of our previous read alouds. So let's get right into it today. We're going to do two read alouds today. One is going to come from They Came Before Columbus. We're going to finish up our revelations from Columbus and realizing that there are Africans that were in the early Americas and what happens as a result of that. And we have a word for the day for you in a word of wisdom. And we're also going to read from Tony Evans' new book, Detours. This is actually a pretty good book. He is talking about detours, destiny. The subtitle is The Unpredictable Path to Your Destiny. And he's actually taking it from the life of Joseph. So it's a study on Joseph. If you love Joseph like I do, you definitely want to get this study. And I believe you can follow the hashtag detours online on Facebook, and you'll see all of the different things that he has been putting up about this book. So we're actually going to read the introduction today, which is What is Destiny? In case you didn't know, today is Thinking Thursday. So we will be doing, like I said, the two read alouds today. And I just have one news article for you that we're going to start off with. And I think this is a very important article, and I think it's a very important case, considering we're going to have a new president who actually believes in what he calls law and order, which is not a new term. The term law and order has been used to kind of subject people of color, especially in the 1960s, to Jim Crow type of laws, Jim Crow type of behavior. So when I hear the words law and order, that's kind of like a red flag for me in terms of how things are going to go with our next administration. So this article that I'm pulling up today has to do with the family of Kalief Browder. And he's going to give a very good rundown of what has happened to this family and what the new bill is that they're putting out in honor of this family. It is a pretty sad story. So if you have not heard of Kalief Browder, or you're not familiar with the story, it's out of New York City. And this is Sean King reporting from the New York Daily News. And the topic is Time for New York to Do Right by Kalief Browder's Family. And so I will kind of scroll through and give you the meat of this article, where he says, the state of New York murdered Kalief Browder. It is not a conservative thing. It is not a liberal thing. It's not a Republican or a Democrat thing. It is a New York thing. And then he says, please hear my heart. I love New York. That's why I'm calling us out right now. I've been all over the world, but New York City is my favorite city, hands down. I've wanted to live and work here my entire life. Moving to Brooklyn with my wife and 5 kids and working for the New York Daily News is a dream come true for me. I told myself, though, that if I moved here, I would not just do my work and keep my head down, but that I would do everything within my power to help make our city and our state the best it can possibly be. We failed Kalief Browder, and our failure cost this young man his life. We should all be ashamed, and I sincerely think the only way we can even begin to atone for what our state did to him was to make sure that we put the right policies and laws in place to absolutely guarantee that it never happens again. For those of you who don't know, Kalief was a kind, sweet soul of a 16-year-old kid. He was believed to look like someone who stole a man's backpack. Kalief was then arrested on the belief that he stole someone's backpack. At the time, he sincerely thought that once he told the police that it wasn't him, that he'd be released, they maybe apologize, and that would be the end of the story. I wish that our justice system worked like that for Black teens and young men, but it didn't. They did not release Kalief. His family, like most families I know, didn't have the money to bail him out, so he was sent to Rikers Island, which is one of the most violent, corrupt, disturbing jails in America. Kalief was jailed alongside grown men and violent offenders and endured abuse from guards and inmates, some of which was captured on video. What Kalief thought would maybe be a day or two turned into weeks, which turned into months, which turned into years. This young man, without ever being convicted of a crime, spent 3 painful, poisonous, destructive years in jail. He was beaten, ridiculed, and broken down. His body, mind, and soul were crushed in that place. Then, with no explanation, the charges were dropped. Kalief struggled with depression following his release from Rikers. In June 2015, using bed sheets, Kalief hanged himself from the window of his mother's home. The pain was too much to bear. A year and a half later, his own mother, Vanita Browder, died of a broken heart. Maybe you hear that story and wonder, how does that mean New York caused Kalief's death? Please allow me to explain. There are only 2 states in the country that automatically charge 16-year-olds as adults for all crimes, no matter the circumstance. One is North Carolina, which has become something like the Mississippi of our time, and the other is New York. North Carolina did not surprise me, but New York, what an embarrassment. That is why a coalition of nearly 100 organizations called Raise the Age New York was launched. This is why I'm going to throw my life behind backing them. It is why our governor even has endorsed this policy, and it just made it a part of his official plan for 2017 in his State of the State address. We must raise the age of prosecution for crimes to 18, like the other 48 states. Exceptions, of course, could be made for the most violent offenses, but New York had New York already had this very simple policy in place, it would have likely changed the path they sent Kalief down. That is one basic, reasonable, humane reform that we should all be able to agree on. What I know for sure is that not a single member of our state legislature would ever want to see what happened to Kalief happen to their own sons or daughters. That's not all, though. At least 2 other safety nets could have been in place for Kalief. Even if our state had not yet done what was right and raised the age, New York currently has a speedy trial crisis. According to our Constitution, okay, the 6th Amendment guarantees every citizen the right to a speedy trial. In this case, that did not happen for Kalief Browder. He actually sat in jail for 3 years, waiting to go on trial. And in those 3 years, that was when he was abused and brutalized and unfortunately traumatized to the point where he never got over it and actually committed suicide. All right. So his constitutional rights were violated. Nobody, not a single person in this state, particularly not a 16-year-old boy accused of stealing a backpack, should spend 3 years in jail waiting to go to court. So he was never found guilty or innocent. And then the charges were dropped after him waiting in 3 years being abused. The charges were dropped. So now you've released a person who's waited 3 years in jail with no trial, and there will never be a trial, but he couldn't undo all of the abuse that happened to him in those 3 years. All right. As it turns out, it wasn't that Kalief fell through the cracks. He was not an anomaly. Their state, New York, has hundreds, maybe thousands of men, women, and children who've been waiting for years to go on trial. This is a crisis. Our entire government should come to a halt to fix this problem. In essence, Black and Latino New Yorkers, who are the primary people experiencing this injustice, are being treated as enemy combatants in our jails if people are not able to face a judge for years on end, are no better than Guantanamo Bay. All right. But even if New York, for some reason, refused to raise the age and refused to offer the constitutional right to a speedy trial, at least one more safety net could have saved Kalief Browder. And what is that safety net? It is fundamentally unethical that we basically have income requirements determining who stays in jail and who doesn't. We might as well check for credit scores. That Kalief and tens of thousands of New Yorkers end up going to jail and costing our state hundreds of millions of dollars simply because they could not afford the upfront cost of a fine is outrageous. With the cost of living in New York being what it is and wages for working class families, meaning that folks can hardly get by, living paycheck to paycheck, what we have now is the reality that we have two justice systems. One for the wealthy and one for everyone else. If someone, particularly people being arrested for petty or nonviolent offenses, can prove that they do not have funds to pay bail, the response should never be to send them to Rikers, one of the most horrible prisons in New York. Our system does not have to be so cruel and obtuse. Instead, people who cannot afford bail should be sent down a very different path with the appropriate legal aid to ensure they attend their court hearings and have a speedy trial. But instead, Kalief was penalized because his family was not rich. Right now, Governor Cuomo has endorsed the 2017 Criminal Justice Reform Act. I support this bill. It is not perfect, but it's pretty good. I want to see Rikers closed once and for all. This bill doesn't do that, but it includes all of the very reasonable reforms that would have saved Kalief from so much of the pain and misery he experienced. This is not a partisan bill. This is not even Black Lives Matter. This is not an anti-cop bill. This is a New York bill that, if anything, will help restore more faith and trust in our justice system. In the age of hyperpartisanship, I believe in my heart that this is one of those rare moments where people from both sides of the aisle can come together and do right by the family of a young man that should still be alive today. Let's do this for Kalief. Let's do this because it's the right thing to do. And I actually agree with Shaun King. I was actually in court, I believe it was last week, and I was in there as a witness for a traffic incident. And one of the things that I actually noticed as they were going through the other cases, as you're sitting in traffic court, and they're going through the cases of those who are being brought in, and so you're kind of waiting your turn for your case. And I noticed distinctly that the majority of Black Americans that came in there, both male and female, could not pay the fees. That's what I noticed. The other thing that I noticed is that when they got there, because the charges were so serious, they had to ask for a postponement so that they could get legal representation because they couldn't afford a lawyer. So guess what? They had to ask for a postponement to see if they could get scheduled with a public defender that would then bring their case back up. But here's the reality. The public defender doesn't work for the person they're representing. They actually work for the state. So I just looked at that and I was like, wow, this is really not good. That, if you go before a judge and you can't afford a lawyer, you're pretty much going to get more than likely the short end of the stick of justice by virtue of the fact that you have no proper representation before you. So that was one of the things that I noticed. And one of the cases that stuck out to me was a young man who had been in jail, and he was out on bail so that he could come to court to address the fact that he had been jailed for a suspended license. He was driving with a suspended license, and he was working, but because he was driving with that suspended license and he didn't have money to get the license renewed, he got put in jail for 30 days, lost the job that he did have, and then had to get out on bail, go to court, resolve the issue of the suspended license. He had since then went and got a renewed license. And so the judge in that case actually had mercy on him, because now he was back at square one, having to find a new job. And so to me, a lot of these situations become catch-22s, right? If the guy was working, but he was trying to get the money to renew his license, but he got caught with a expired license, which put him in jail, which caused him to lose the job that he actually had. So yeah, we've got to do something about what Shaun King is calling these non-violent offenses. Is it really the best solution to fine people to death? So that's just something to think about. Is the fine the solution to addressing something like an expired license? And if the person is too poor to afford the fine, then they're going to wind up in jail waiting to get out, hoping that they have some family members that can raise some bail money. Very similar in the case of when we talk about fines, kind of similar in the case of Sandra Bland. Sandra Bland was pulled over for what? A quote unquote driving violation. She got put in jail. She didn't have the money to get herself out. She called relatives. Relatives couldn't help her. And by the next morning, she was dead. So we kind of need to look into that whole, fining for non-violent offenses. So just something to think about. I know there's probably going to be lots of debate around that. We know that sometimes that's how precincts and that's how cities and everything make their money, is by how many fines they can collect from the citizens. But there's got to be some other and better answers. I want to go ahead and give you all an opportunity to win a journal for today. This is our journal. Our giveaway for today. It's got lots of lovely words on it. Smile, inspire, fearless courage. And our question is going to come from the game Black Card Revoked. In order to be eligible to win the journal, you have to answer the question not on the screen, but you're going to answer it by emailing me at reachshante@gmail.com. reachshante@gmail.com. And this is a question that is multiple choice, so you have at least a 25% chance of getting it right. The question is, it's the term for cutting relaxed hair off to leave only natural hair. What is the term? What is the term for cutting relaxed hair off to leave only natural hair? Remember, you can email the answer at reachshante, SHANTAE, @gmail.com. Is it A, scissoring, B, hair splitting, C, the big chop, or D, shingling? What is the term for cutting relaxed hair off to leave only natural hair? So that is our giveaway and our question on that for today. Our word of the day is obdurate. Obdurate. Obdurate is our word for the day. And I actually think this is a pretty good word for us to learn, because I think I have met several obdurate people, especially since this year has started. Obdurate means hardened in wrongdoing or wickedness, stubbornly impenitent, intractable, not giving in to or altered by persuasion. In other words, God judges the obdurate, those who are hardened in wrongdoing or wickedness, stubbornly impenitent, that means that you don't want to repent, intractable, that means you're not willing to retract anything you've done or said, and not giving in to or altered by persuasion. Obdurate is our word of the day. So if you come across some people that like that, you can now tell them, I think you're being obdurate in your behavior and your actions. All right. So let's get into our findings with Columbus. They came before Columbus, the African presence in ancient America by Ivan van Sertima. And we're going to find out what happens as Columbus gets some evidence from the Espanola Indians that an African presence has been there before him. The African spears presented by the Espanola Indians, which corroborated Don Juan's statement about the Guinea boats, were just one in a number of new factors pushing Columbus toward an exploration of the route from Guinea. His brother Bartholomew arrived in Espanola in command of 3 caravels on June 24, 1494. The admiral had not seen his brother for many years, and Bartholomew knew more, Las Casas tells us, than Christopher himself of the intelligence coming out of the Portuguese African world. Bartholomew had worked as a cartographer in Lisbon. While there, he had drawn numerous maps for mariners, and he witnessed yearly the return of ships which had been navigating to the western lands of Africa by way of the ocean. Enlightened and moved by the tales told him by those who returned, as one might say, from another world, and himself more versed in maritime affairs, he communicated to his elder brother his reasons and arguments, proving to him that in sailing away from the southern part of Africa and directing his course straight upon the ocean sea, he would surely arrive at continental land. He confirmed that what Don Juan had told Columbus the previous year. When Columbus returned to the Spanish court in 1496, he found everywhere a spirited discussion of these continental lands said to lie to the south of the lands he had discovered, and which the King of Portugal seemed to think lay within his own domain. Jaime Ferrer, a jeweler and trader in precious stones, also a distinguished geographer who had done extensive traveling in Africa and had been called in by the Spanish sovereigns to head the commission fixing the Tordesillas line, wrote letters to Isabella, who commanded him to get in touch with Columbus and tell him all he had heard about this new continent. Ferrer said he had picked up his knowledge from Ethiopians and Arabs. He had had many conversations in the Levant, in Alcaine and Domus, and from these he had gathered that within equinoctial regions there are great and precious things, such as fine stones and gold and spices and drugs. The inhabitants are black or tawny. When your lordship Columbus finds such a people, in an abundance of said things shall not be lacking. His latter ends with the strange writer who goes beyond mere graciousness and implies that he knew some of this information had already been conveyed to Columbus. Of all this matter, your lordship knows more when sleeping than I do waking. The king and queen were excited. They saw whole new kingdoms opening up. The colonization of a rag bag of islands was not enough. Columbus's mission would not be complete, they said, until these continental lands had been discovered and brought under the banner of Spain. Thus, the scene was set for the exploration of the route the African mariners had taken to the New World. Columbus sailed with 6 ships on May 30th, 1498. He issued instructions to 3 of them to proceed to Hispaniola directly, while he ordered the course laid to the way of the southwest, which is the route leading from these islands to the south, because then he would be on a parallel with the lands of Sierra Leone and the Cape of Santa Ana in Guinea, which is below the equinoctial line. And after that, he would navigate to the west, and from there he would go to this Hispaniola, in which route he would prove the theory of King Don Juan, and that he thought to investigate the report of the Indians of this Hispaniola, who said that there had come to Hispaniola from the south and southeast a black people who have the tops of their spears made of a metal which they call guanin. The journey by that route proved to be swift and the seas calm, but it suited the Africans far more than the Europeans, who could not bear the sun burning down upon the floating grasses of the sea with the same intensity as upon the grasses of the West African savanna lands. The heat tormented them almost to madness as they advanced through the Sargasso Sea. So ardent it was, so penetrating, that Columbus feared the ships would take fire. The butts of wine and water swelled, breaking the hoops of the casks. The wheat burned like fire, and the pork and salted meat roasted and putrefied. Fortunately, the rains came, without which, according to Columbus, none of them, unaccustomed as they were to such burning latitudes, would have escaped alive. Columbus ended up on a branch of the North Equatorial Current, which took him initially to a Caribbean island with 3 great rocks, which made him think of the Holy Trinity. He named this island Trinidad. A little more to the south, however, he did come in sight of the South American mainland. Columbus, for some odd reason, would not land. On this 3rd voyage, he came upon more evidence of the contact between Guinea and the New World. From a settlement along the South American coast, on which his men landed on Tuesday, August 7th, the natives brought handkerchiefs of cotton, very symmetrically woven and worked in colors like those brought from Guinea, from the rivers of Sierra Leone, and of no difference. Not only were they alike in style and color, but also in function. These handkerchiefs, he said, resembled almaziars, Guinea headdresses, and loincloths. Each one is a cloth so woven in colors that it appeared with one tied on the head and the other covering the rest. These were the earliest documented traces of the African presence. Within the 1st and 2nd decades of the so-called discovery, African settlements and artifacts were to be cited by the Spanish. When they were not reported as mere asides, they were ignored or suppressed. But history is not easily buried. In oral traditions of the Native Americans and the Guinea Africans, in the footnotes of the Spanish and Portuguese documents, part of the story lies. Another part lies embalmed under the American and African earth. As this earth is now being lifted by archaeological picks and trowels, a new skeleton emerges of the history of these adjacent worlds. So these were some of the first traces, again, of the African presence in the Americas. If you'd like to read more in this book, it is called They Came Before Columbus, The African Presence in Ancient America. All right. Now we're moving on to our last read aloud for today. And that is from Tony Evans' work, Detours. Detours. So if you're in my Periscope audience this morning, I would like for you to type just briefly what you think detours mean on the screen. And I'll give you a moment to do that. What is a detour to you? What is a detour to you? All right. Let's take a look at what Tony Evans says here. God has a plan for your life. More often than not, good, a detour may be an unexpected route or a change in plans. Agreed. More often than not, it's a detour, one that can leave you feeling temporarily stalled and slowed down, which nobody likes. But detours are necessary if any improvements are going to be made on the paths we travel, or if any wreck is going to be cleaned up or a hazard avoided. Detours are designed for our own good, regardless of how we view or feel about them. Detours are a good thing that often feel bad. So, using examples from the life of Joseph, Tony will leave readers with answers to the following questions. How do you find the destiny God has designed for your life? How can you make the most of the detours God has planned for you? Is there a way to shorten the detour and speed up your progression in life? And what is the purpose of a detour? So today we're just going to read the introduction. What is destiny? What is destiny? And I thought this was very, very powerful, even in his first paragraph. He says, millions of people loved the television show Seinfeld when it aired. A college drama department did a study to find out why Seinfeld was so popular. They determined that the reason was because of its plotless programming. Seinfeld just meandered haplessly from one scene, one circumstance to the next without connection. The drama department concluded that Americans who lead plotless lives prefer plotless TV programs. Wow. I don't want to be the person that leads a plotless life. There's a plotlessness that exists in many of our lives today. Often we move from one scene, one circumstance to the next without purpose. We wander from high school to college, from college to our first job. Then we're just dying to get married. And then we're just dying to have kids. Next, we're dying to get them out of the house. Then we're dying to retire, only to find out that we are dying, never having known why we were alive in the first place. But what would life look like if we all lived with a purpose and with a destiny? How would we act and think differently if we saw God's hand in the plots of our lives, connecting one circumstance to the next in the tapestry of His will? How would that affect our emotions? How would that affect our choices? How would that affect our outlook? I believe it would affect it greatly, because when you add purpose to the mix of pain and patience, it gives you the ability to push on. It gives you the ability to keep going when your get up and go has gotten up and gone. It gives you the strength to accept and face your fears, disappointments, and pain rather than seek distractions to avoid them. Since this book is called Detours, sharing biblical principles of how God will often take you from where you are now to where He wants you to go, I thought it would be best if we started with a look at the destination. Let's look at what destiny means. Now, according to Tony Evans, destiny is the customized life calling for which God has equipped and ordained us in order to bring Him the greatest glory and the maximum expansion of His kingdom. Every believer must understand, first and foremost, that his premier destiny is to glorify God and make His name known. And he takes this from Isaiah 43, verses 6 through 7. Destiny always starts there. It always involves bringing glory to God somehow. It begins with the place of God integrating in our lives in such a way that people come into contact with Him through our words, spirit, emotions, and actions. If you want to find your destiny, find God. After all, He is the author of it. And I don't mean find Him as if He's lost and you do not know Him. I mean get close to Him. Get to know God's heart and come to recognize His voice more than anyone else's in your life. Now, I have to super high five Tony Evans and agree with that. Many times we tend to recognize everyone else's voice in our life except the Lord. And this is problematic because if you don't recognize the voice of the Lord in your life and you are solely dependent on your best friends or your family or even your pastor, they can actually lead you down a road and down a path that, you know, they may have had a good intention for, but the reality is if God is saying go the opposite direction of what they're saying and you can't hear God, then, you know, you could wind up in a different path of life, unsatisfied, dissatisfied, depressed, and then you'll find yourself blaming the people who gave you the advice that God was not giving. Sometimes they are just giving you good advice because they want the best for you. But sometimes what your relatives want or what your friends want is not necessarily what God is leading you to do. So it is important to recognize God's voice more than anybody else's voice in your life. He goes on to say, learn what pleases him and makes him smile about you. Spend time with him. Talk to him. God must occupy the central place in your heart, mind, motivation, and actions. After all, the heart of destiny itself is to serve the purposes of God. As you obey and serve the Lord, he will make his purpose for you crystal clear. You won't have to hunt for it or chase it or put out fleece upon fleece upon fleece to discern it. God is not playing hide and seek with your destiny. He just wants you to seek him first, and then all of the things you need in your life will be given to you. Why is finding and living out our destiny so important? He says, I have served as a pastor for more than 40 years. This has given me the unique opportunity to be in people's lives at a level that most do not experience. With that, I'm able to notice patterns that pop up routinely. One pattern I've seen repeatedly is this pattern of purpose linked to personal satisfaction. When people don't live with the sense that God has given them a divine purpose in life, or that they are fulfilling it, they become depressed. I've witnessed that more times than I wish. That's why I'm so passionate about helping people find the principles that can open up the path of destiny in their lives. Everyone has a destiny and a purpose to fulfill. Everyone. Each member of the body of Christ has a unique role to play. But when some members don't fulfill their God-given destiny, the body cannot function. It's as it was designed to function. Others are affected negatively when we do not live out our purpose. We are all interconnected in God's kingdom, and that's why it's critical that we all make seeking God and living out our purpose an important thing to do, not just for others, but also because it will benefit you. When you discover your destiny, you'll begin to live life like you never have before. You will have skills to bounce back from disappointments and challenges, even pain. You will find resolve and determination that will enable you to accomplish things you didn't even know you could accomplish. Your passion and delight in what you do will be contagious to those around you, making your sphere of influence better as a result. You will push through things that used to defeat you. Though persecution plagued the Apostle Paul throughout his life, he frequently looked back to the destiny Jesus gave him on Damascus Road and regained the confidence to keep going. We know that we are fulfilling our purpose by the strength we find to keep going when circumstances say most people would give up. I actually kind of see your calling as a compass, right? When you have had an encounter with God, and I pray that if you have not had one, that you will. When you have an encounter with God about your purpose, when you have an encounter with God about your calling, as he said here, all of the stuff that the Apostle Paul went through, and you can read about it in the book of Acts. I mean, this man, people were fasting and hoping that he would die. He was beat almost to the point, basically to the point of death, and thrown outside of a city at one point. He had to escape some people who were trying to imprison him. He had to be put down a wall. So there's a lot of things that went on in Paul's life, but I can see the fact that Paul's compass was the calling of God on his life. And it was such a impactful way that God called him, right? That he couldn't do anything but take that memory with him throughout his journey. So one of the things that helps me, I know specifically, when I am faced with things that I'm just looking around and I'm like, are you serious? Are you serious? Are you for real? Is this actually happening? Did I just go through that? Did they just say that to me? Like, really? The thing that helps me is to go back to my compass called my calling with God. The thing that helps me is to go back to my compass called my relationship with God. And those are things that people cannot take away from you. They can say things about you. They can accuse you of crazy things. They can, try to say things to you to deter you. But if you have had an encounter with God and you know your calling for sure, it is very hard for somebody to just knock you off from following God if you know what you're called to do. And so I agree with Tony when he says that Paul had to frequently look back to the destiny that Jesus gave him on Damascus Road. It was him and Jesus. Though there were other people there, the scripture records that some people saw the light, but they didn't hear what was being said to Paul. So it really was a personal moment that Paul had with Jesus that gave him his call, that gave him his purpose, and that gave him his commissioning. And he was going to need that call and commissioning to cause him to keep moving forward and to keep pushing forward and to keep doing what God had told him that he would do. So you find strength when you can get back to understanding what your purpose is in the first place, because there are going to be, as the book is going to detail, there are going to be things that are going to detour you. There are going to be things that are going to try to sidetrack you. But if you know your calling, you can use that calling, your calling, as your compass to say, I know this may be going on. I know this may be happening right now, but ultimately, I know that God set me on a path. I know that God sent me, and I know that God called me, and I'm fulfilling that call, and I'm going to keep moving forward, and I'm going to keep pressing forward. All right. So let's take a look at another part of what he says here. Part of living out your destiny comes in living out the uniqueness of you. God has uniquely designed you for his purposes. God has woven you together intricately and uniquely to bring him glory, bless others, and expand his kingdom. Psalms 139, verses 13 through 14 says, "For it was you who created my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I will praise you because I have been remarkably and wonderfully made." Another verse which speaks to your personal stamp is found in Ephesians 2 and 10. "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand so that we would walk in them." In this verse, the word workmanship actually means masterpiece. Keep in mind that the title masterpiece is reserved for the most glorious example of a certain art form, such as a poem, a painting, a sculpture, or a piece of music. Masterpieces are known as such because of the skill and expertise of their creator. Because of this, God's masterpieces must be set apart. In order for you to be the masterpiece God wants you to be, he must sanctify you and make you more like Jesus Christ. To do this, he often puts detours in your life to develop you. He takes you on a path that will give you the grace to grow. God will continue shaping and molding you as his masterpiece over the course of many detours until you are ready to fully realize all he has for you to do. Oh, Periscopy. Thank you guys for bearing with me on my YouTube. I'm trying to get my Periscope people back on. Thank you guys. Appreciate you. So, all right. Let's see if we can get it going. There we go. Every day this week, Periscope has cut off. So they may need to increase their own bandwidth over there on Periscope. Welcome. So I like the fact that Tony Evans talks about how God will put you on a path that will give you the grace to grow. Oftentimes we look at our detours and we say, what in the smack dab is this? What in the world is going on? Why would God send me in this direction? And a lot of times it's to give us the grace to grow. Sometimes it is what's in us that we don't even know is in us that needs to come out. And so God says, I can't give you that just yet. I can't give you that job just yet. I can't put you in that relationship just yet. Because if I do, you're going to jack it up. You're going to jack it up. There's character things that need to be developed in you that if I put you in that job, you're going to make a mess of it and you're going to come out worse than you would have had I not sent you on this particular path. I can't put you in that relationship just yet because I need to get bitterness out of you. Because if I put you in this relationship and you are taking your bitterness and you're seasoning your new relationship with all your bitterness, just seasoning your relationship with it, you're going to spoil what I intended for that relationship to be. So yes, God does take us on paths that will give us the grace to grow. Sometimes we don't grow from it. We look at the children of Israel and he took them a longer route. It specifically said, he specifically told Moses, I'm taking you all a different route because if I take you straight through, you're going to encounter some enemies that you all are not strong enough for, that you all are not ready for, that your mindset is not ready for. You all are still, trying to wish you had cucumbers and leeks, and I'm trying to bring you over into milk and honey. Uh-oh. I need to change your entire diet because you've been used to cucumbers and leeks and a slave diet over in Egypt. But I want to bring you into a place where you have developed taste buds and an appetite for milk and honey. That's a whole preach sermon. And so I know if I just take you straight through, some of us would actually reject the promise because you're not ready for it. So yes, God does take us on paths that will give us the grace to grow. The question is, are we going to see it as the place of growth? Or are we going to spend our time complaining that we're not where we want to be just yet? Are we going to spend our time complaining that we don't have, maybe even it's material things, that we don't have the material things that we want at this particular time? So are we going to take the opportunity to grow, or are we going to gripe and grumble and groan against the place that God has put us in? Let's keep reading. Not only are you a masterpiece, but God has also prepared good works for you to do. That means the good works God has prepared are the biblically authorized activities that bring God glory and benefit others. As you walk in the path of good works He has laid out, you will fulfill your destiny. Sometimes this requires learning, growing, and developing as a person. These seasons are what we refer to as a detour. There are times when God seeks to mold us into the character He can use for good works. That's not always fun. Sometimes it hurts. It's often longer than any of us wish, but God will accomplish his desired result if you follow him. It's only when we fuss, fight, and complain that our detours drag on longer than necessary. When you iron a shirt that is wrinkled, you have to add steam and heat in order to get the wrinkles out. And why do we iron shirts or pants or dresses? Because we want to look good when we wear them. In the same way, God has to put us through the fires of refinement to smooth out the rough places and correct our flaws. Now imagine if that shirt you were ironing wouldn't sit still. Imagine if it kept hopping off the ironing board. Or what if it would bundle itself into a tight ball each time you attempted to iron it? How long would that ironing session take then if the shirt simply lay flat and allowed you to press it into perfection? The same holds true for us on our detours. Far too often, we are the cause of our own delays. We are the cause of our own additional detours. Our lack of compliance with God's development in our hearts, spirit, and souls will far too often prolong that which we do not enjoy. Surrender is a critical secret to speeding up the process toward your destiny. We, as God's masterpieces, bear our Master's name and image. He wants to make sure that image reflects him well. When we fulfill our God-ordained destinies, God wants others to see the beauty of him through us, and that takes refinement in us. I'm going to stop there for today. But I like this analogy. I actually did a message where I took out an ironing board and an iron, and I began to iron some clothes. And one of the things that I found in this myself was that, first of all, most of us would look at this in our day and age and say, well, I don't have to be ironed because, I'm that wrinkle-free fabric. And we have some people that believe that they're wrinkle-free, that there's nothing wrong with them, that there's no place for them to grow. There's no place for them to develop. They have it all together. Well, if you have it all together, then that means that you should be in heaven. That's what that means. Obviously, if you're still here, you don't have it all together. So we have to, as he used this analogy, let God work on us and let God press us. One of the things that I did in my analogy of using an iron and an ironing board is I used the fact that all of us are not the same fabric, right? Some of us are wool. Some of us are cotton. Some of us are a little mixture. We're a little lycra and some rayon together. And some of us are silk, which means that if I'm being pressed by God, I may be wool and you might be silk. And that means the amount of pressure and heat that God applies to me to get me straightened out may not be the same amount of pressure and heat that he applies to you to get you straightened out. But the reality is we all have areas that need to be straightened out. So we can't look over, I can't look over at my sister Rochelle and say, oh, well, why isn't she going through that? Or why does she have that and why don't I have it? We have to understand that as he said here very, very clearly, we are all masterpieces, but we're not all painted the same way. We're not all sculpted the same way. But God does have an ultimate purpose that all of us must match, and that is to give God glory in our life. The last thing he says here is that, where is it? Surrender is a critical secret to speeding up the process towards your destiny. People often ask me, how do you do all of the stuff that you do? And you write, you sing, you paint, you publish, you edit, all of these different things. How do I do it? I'm gonna tell you how. Yes, Lord. That's my secret. It really is. I'm not trying to be funny. I'm just telling you, I have learned to just say, yes, Lord. As Tony Evans said, Surrender is how you will speed up your process. If you kick against the pricks, if you tell God no, if you're giving God 1,001 excuses of why you can't do what he said to do, just know that your trip, your journey, your process is going to take longer than you want. Just bottom line. So I would encourage you today to learn to tell the Lord yes in your life. Don't be obdurate today, right? Don't be the obdurate soul today, the person that's hardened in wrongdoing or wickedness, but just do what the Lord is instructing you to do. Now, does that mean that you don't ask God any questions? No, it doesn't mean that. You can go to God and say, okay, you want me to write a book. Okay, God, what kind of book do you want me to write? What should I be writing about? How many pages should this book be? Is it going to be a novel? Is it going to be the story of my life? Am I supposed to collaborate with somebody in writing this book? When do you want this book completed? Who should I be seeking out to help me with my book? So those are questions that you can ask, but the bottom line is, if God is telling you to do something, for example, like write a book, you've got to say, okay, God, I yield to this direction. Now give me some further instructions. Show me where to go. Show me what to do. Show me how to get it done. All right. So that's complying with the Lord. But if you say, I ain't writing no book, I'm not writing a book, I'm not writing a book ever, then you have just set yourself up to do battle with the will of the Lord. So I hope that you got something out of our Daring Dialogues today. Again, we will see you all on tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I want you to take care of yourself. Remember, don't be obdurate today. And if you run across some obdurate people, make sure you pray for them. And just pray that God will open up their eyes of their understanding, open up their hearts, that they wouldn't harden their hearts against the will, the plan, and the direction of God. And make sure you're not the obdurate person on today. All right. So this was another edition of Daring Dialogues. Take care and God bless.